Yeah, but that'll be super fun. I think by the time this episode comes out, it'll probably be quite some time after Belfast. It's going to be weird listening back to this and knowing what chaos and we
What if we all hate
caused.
each other?
What?
So what if we all hate each other? You can delete me out of this episode. It'll just be you and Robin.
Oh, no.
Perfect. It's just the way that I like it. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny Cirilla of Cintra across the continent. So I don't know if you guys have noticed anything new, but I got a brand new pre-owned mic this last week. It sounds so beautiful. Huge thank you to my wonderful friend in Japan, Nick. I actually have a recording of when I first unboxed it and plugged it in for the first time. I had a freaking meltdown. I mean, she's definitely coming in. Okay. Hello? Hello? Oh my god, the waveforms look so good. But I don't know if this mic is heavy enough to... Oh, wait, there we go. Okay, so I'm... maybe 4 inches off the mic right now, and those look like healthy-ass fucking waveforms. I'm so excited. It was very, very fun. The other thing that came up last week, if you guys are out and about on the Breakfast in Beauclair social, Tom Canton offered to come on to Breakfast in Beauclair to have a conversation about him and his career. Unfortunately, that's going to be postponed for a bit due to scheduling conflicts. However, we're still looking forward to a special episode on Thursday, August 18th while I'm out of town. We're going to take a look at one of my favorite behind-the-scenes aspects of Breakfast in Beauclair, the music. That being said, thank you so much to our patrons and our producer-level patrons, Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie, the redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Beggarburg Glamorai, Red Kite, the original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Jen D. Mandilovich, Wolf, Corey from the U.S., John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, who's on this episode, Father of Bean, Silocybe Sorcerer, a Toussaint Knight, Jeanette of Brocalon, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. If you would like to learn more about becoming a patron of the show, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, James from the US and Robin from the Netherlands call in for our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher, episode 205, Turn Your Back. Join us as we discuss the introduction of new antagonists, flipped perspectives, fresh combinations of characters, the importance of building trust between actors, a deep dive into the Elder Blood plotline, splitting the party, how Turn Your Back is realized throughout the episode, and Twisted Mermaids. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from Witcher Flicks shares production updates for The Witcher Season 3 and The Witcher Blood Origin. After the break, don't miss our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 205, Turn Your Back, Part 1. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today I'm welcoming 2 fantastic members of our hanza to the show. My first guest is the Sports Information Director at Lesley University, who handles live statistics and recaps of every athletic event. He's a staple in the America's D&D game, playing Branson, Aiden, and now Lyle, and DMs our Call of the Netherdeep campaign on Sundays. He's the hanza's resident superhero and comics expert, and also the host of this summer's Hanza meetup in Boston. Please welcome James from the US. Hello, James.
Hi. Everybody's coming to my house.
Oh my god. We're not all going to go to his house.
No, only some. But I can't wait. I'm so excited.
It'll be super fun. I'm so looking forward to that. That's going to be in August. So if any of you guys are interested in going, please let us know and join the Hanza Discord for details on that. You will also recognize my second guest from Breakfast in Beauclair, episodes 17 and 18, covering 4 marks. Since her first appearance on the show, she's now a Master of Arts in Cultural History and has also finally finished the Witcher books. She's also one of the hanza's original D&D players, playing Amelia and now Ginny in the European games. Please welcome back Robin from the Netherlands. Hello, Robin.
Hello.
It's so nice to have you back. You were such a delight on your first episodes. Your dissertation on women in The Witcher was one of my favorite episodes from that season. And I'm so thrilled to hear what you're going to bring back this time around.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so fun to be on another episode. Good times.
Well, before we get to the actual episode content, obviously I'd love to hear more about both of you. And we'll start with James. So, James, how did you get into The Witcher?
At the end of 2019, my friends and I all went to see The Rise of Skywalker, and we were all so disappointed. And on the car ride home, we were all kind of just sitting in silence. And one of my friends says, hey, at least The Witcher's coming out next week. That looks pretty cool. And we were all like, oh, thank God we have something to talk about. And so, yeah, I started with season 1. I watched that, and then I loved it. So I bought The Last Wish, and I read the whole thing on a plane ride to Florida. So when I got home, I bought all the rest of the books. I was like, okay, I'll read these over the next few months. And then the pandemic happened. So I read them all in a month, bought an Xbox, played The Witcher 3 for the next couple months, and now I'm here.
It's always surprised me that, like, you came into the Witcher universe with the Netflix show, just because I think of your general vigor. Like, you're so excited and so passionate about it and so enthusiastic. Like, I feel like you have the aura of somebody who came in during the games or the books. So, like, I'm surprised that it, like, happened so quickly, and then, like, you were part of the Hanza, and then that's kind of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how my brain does stuff. Like Game of Thrones, the exact same way. I watched season 1, and I was like, all right, I'm in, fully in, reading everything, watching everything. Now that that's over, this is kind of my next one.
Yeah, and speaking of Game of Thrones, at the time of recording, it's only May 1st. Happy Bellaton. But we will be going to Belfast at the end of the month for, like, our first European Hansa meetup. And that's entirely because James is a Game of Thrones fan and is already going to be in Belfast and has somehow convinced all of these Europeans to come meet him, as well as me.
It's because of my charm and magnetic personality.
No, that's not it. And Robin, you've been up to so many things, I feel like, since you were last on the show. I know that you finished your master's, which is super exciting. Congratulations. What else have you been up to?
Yeah, congratulations.
Oh, thanks. I was thinking today about, like, all the things that I've been up to. It was also May, I think, that we recorded that episode 2 years ago. It was the beginning of the pandemic. I am currently doing a board year with my choir and orchestra, which is what takes up like 80% of my life at the moment. So lots of music, lots of organizing, lots of running around and being like, instruments, people, that's like 80% of my life right now. It's very taxing, but also a lot of fun. And I wrote my master's thesis. I think we talked about that on that episode, that I just finished my bachelor's thesis. So now I just finished my master's thesis. So it's like, yeah. I've been doing a lot.
What was the subject of your master's thesis?
It was my choir and orchestra, actually. My choir and orchestra is about 75 years old. It's very interesting how many young people come together and make music, especially music by Johann Sebastian Bach, even though that's like a very black and white view on it. But it's a very interesting dichotomy, if that's a word in English. And I was like, it's especially interesting if you look at the 60s, because that was a time in which old classical thing just got thrown out the window by young people. So I was very interested in how people who were young in that time, who were part of the protest generation, were also making that music and trying to combine all these roles and identities they had, and how that changed the identity of the organization, really.
Was there anything that, like, particularly surprised you in your research?
Not necessarily, but mostly stuff that just drew me in. Mostly just that they were having discussions in the early 60s about whether they could do dance parties.
Yeah.
After concerts, because that's like a staple now. When we have had a concert, we go have a party. But they were having like discussions like, can we do that? Like, we as the board, do we think that's a bad idea because it's indecent and it's not good for the atmosphere? And I was like, damn, guys. So that was very interesting. And that's like what drew me in. This is a very interesting subject to talk about, because it's a very different worldview. And you, like, that worldview was 1963, and it just completely shifts in like 5, 6, 7 years. And that's just bizarre to me. So that whole decade is just super, super interesting. It took me a long time to write it, but I was very pleased with the result, and I'm still waiting until I can like show it to my fellow choir and orchestra people to be like, look at how cool our organization, look at the history, a little bit like that.
Yeah, I feel like university is such an interesting time to research, I feel like, just because, it's so transitory and you never have the same batch of people for longer than 9 months, 10 months, really.
Mhm.
And I'd imagine that it's one of those ecosystems that just circulates so quickly in terms of ideology and interests and all those things. It's a really interesting, like, petri dish of a study.
Absolutely.
So, James, one of the things that you're, I think, infamously known for in the Hanza is your interest in, like, comics, movies, all of the things. One of the questions that I love to ask guests on the podcast is for additional recommendations. So, as far as The Witcher goes, do you happen to have any recommendations in terms of comics or movies or television shows that might interest listeners of Breakfast in Beauclair?
I do. So you can obviously start with the whole old man taking care of a young child thing and watch Logan. It's obviously about Wolverine meeting his young clone, Laura. And then there's another actually X-Men related story in the mid to late 2000s after House of M, where Scarlet Witch decimates the mutant population. There's only like 198 of them left. A baby girl who's just been born, and she ends up being called the Mutant Messiah. Like, she's the one who's going to bring back mutants, rebuild the population, make them Homo superior again. For the next 5 years, there's like a 3-part event saga called the Messiah War about Cable protecting Hope. It has the same vibes as Geralt and Ciri, this child of elder blood, child of immense power who has the ability to change the world, and all he wants to do is make sure that she is okay.
Yeah, I feel like something called the Messiah War just feels very on the nose.
Yes.
I think for The Witcher especially. And we'll certainly see that, in this episode 205, Turn Your Back, I think, as Geralt is roaming around the continent and trying to look out for his child of destiny, as we'll see. Today, we'll continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 2 with episode 205, Turn Your Back, in which Geralt and Yennefer search for answers as Ciri, Triss, and Vesemir scheme back in Kaer. In the first scene, Lydia... I can't even say this with a straight face. In the first scene, Lydia breaks Rince out of prison. In a flashback, it's revealed that Rince was in the tavern as Jaskier performed Burn, Butcher, Burn. So... God.
Talk about it.
If you're part of the Hanza and you're part of the Hanza Discord, you know that I have so many feelings about Rince as a character. If you've read the books, Rince is like the character to love to hate. And I was very stressed.
Very stressed.
Watching this episode. And I had like an epic meltdown because I love to hate this character. He's a dumb, incompetent, try-hard character in the books. It was the kind of thing that, like, when I saw him on screen, I was like, oh no, why is he shirtless and oiled and scary?
I wrote in my notes, Rince is hot, Alyssa's nightmare.
Yeah.
It's not even the fact that he's hot, it's the fact that he's competent.
That
like,
too.
Why did they make him so competent?
Honestly, the feeling that I had when reading the books, he, like, at the beginning, he doesn't necessarily feel incompetent, because I think that's something that happens later on, that you're like, oh god, this dude. I'm very neutral about this character. It's like, oh yeah, he's scary. He wants to find Ciri. That's scary enough.
I think the thing about that is that at the start of the books, he's facing off with Dandelion, who is also super incompetent.
Yeah.
So just by relation of that, Rince doesn't look super incompetent. But as we find out, he is.
But we do get like a slightly different point of view on him and of Lydia, who we also met briefly in Blood of Elves. I actually really enjoy the majority of this perspective on the two of them, just because we see Lydia as a very capable character. She's coming down into these cells, presumably below Cintra. They're not super explicit with where this prison is, but we can assume it's probably in around Cintra because he was imprisoned by Calanthe for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
She comes down to this prison, finds Rince in a Dimerdium prison, where he's just kind of sitting in the corner and snapping his fingers and can't do anything because of the Dimerdium, which bars his use of magic. As they're chit-chatting, it's clear that they at least have some passing relation with each other because they're familiar with each other's names. Then it's revealed that Lydia came to Rince specifically because she needs him to do a task for, quote, her employer. And Rince is at first like, I don't want to work for Nilfgaard. And she's like, I didn't say anything about Nilfgaard. And he's suddenly interested.
I love that. His only job requirement is, I will not work for Nilfgaard. Presumably, she tells him off screen who her employer is, but I like the idea that he's like, not Nilfgaard, anything else. Works for me.
I was thinking about Lydia and the way she's introduced in the books and also who she works for. And that I felt like if they're already introducing her and that she's working for somebody else, and then we see her working for a specific person, isn't there some reveal that is happening later on in the story in the books that is kind of already somewhat spoiled?
Yeah.
Specifically who her employer is, who's also after Ciri, which I feel like is very carefully set up in the books. I was like, oh, I'm not sure how that's gonna play out if they're already introducing Lydia here. I don't think it's a bad thing or it's a bad idea. I'm just wondering how they're gonna do that.
I guess we can kind of parse spoilers on the podcast between what's been talked about in Blood of Elves versus what's coming up in Time of Contempt and on.
Yeah.
So just as a recap for listeners, when we first meet Lydia, I believe it's in Chapter 5 of Blood of Elves, the lower half of her face is already gone. That disfigurement has already happened prior to the books taking place. The scene in question is from Toussaint's perspective, and she's going to visit Lydia's employer. Lydia is the one who greets them and kind of takes them through the house and serves them dinner and all that stuff. That's the context in which we get Lydia in the books. So it's really interesting here, I would agree, to like get her as her own autonomous person. She's up to something clearly, but she's also answering to somebody, which makes it all the more interesting. I think especially somebody who doesn't know the plot of the books. And then at some point, obviously, Lydia breaks him out of jail, and then we have that whole gratuitous makeover scene in which, like, Chris Fulton is shaving, and he takes off his shirt, and he's super oily, and it's just like...
looking great. Way to go, Chris.
It's, okay, if you watch Bridgerton, Chris Fulton is the same actor that plays Sir Philip Crane, Marina's husband, and I don't remember how I found that out, but, like, it was just mind-boggling to me. Like, he definitely has the range, and he's so terrifying as Rince and so unassuming as Sir Philip Crane.
Yes.
But holy crap.
He's so nice to Colin.
Yes, he's so nice. Having seen both shows, I wouldn't have picked it out. Like, really, I wouldn't have seen it because it's not recognizable if you've seen, like, the first and then the other one. It's, like, so different. It's wild. I love it.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Would have had no idea who's hiding, like, that freaking, like, washboard 8-pack under all of his Regency clothes. Oh, man. But yeah, so it turns out he was in the tavern watching Jaskier as he was performing Burn Butcher Burn in the previous episode. So now we have a bit of a suspicion as to who might have attacked Jaskier at the docks.
First of all, I love how the meaning of Burn Butcher Burn changes there as it shows Rince and lingers on those words. And then we know later on in the episode that he's a fire mage. Hear Burn Butcher Burn over his face. You're like, uh-oh, this is not going to go well for somebody. I also really enjoy how this episode, it's the first episode of the second half of the season. They take two scenes from the end of episode 4 and kind of flip the perspective. So in this one where we get a little bit of Jaskier doing a song and then the focus pulls away from him, we're still in the same scene, but now we're seeing that Rince was there the whole time. Surprise.
And as we move forward from the flashback in the tavern, we are brought to Cintra. In this next scene, Geralt teleports into Istrid's study in Cintra, searching for a relationship between the new monsters and the monoliths the mage studies. So at the end of the last episode, Geralt's, this is again the perspective shifting that James had mentioned, Geralt teleports into Istrid's study and we get a brief like, who goes there? But in this episode, we get the scene from Istrid's perspective. Since we last saw Istrid, maybe in episode like 2 or 3, he's since made it to Cintra from Aretuza. And he's kind of muttering to himself that he's been given work from Fringilla. And he's just like, boats are no longer safe for elves, says Fringilla. Now we need a lander to Cintra, says Fringilla. Well, the Urugu is flooded and impassable, says Fringilla. Foldus is fortified Bruges beyond recognition. Brokilon, no. And it's a very cute little scene. He mutters to himself a lot in this season. Because a lot of his scenes are by himself, but it's cute. It's a little delightful.
Yeah.
I love Royce Pearson. I'm so glad that they found a way to keep Istrid in the story, because once they do a Shard of Ice, he's gone. You don't see him again in the books. But I'm so glad that they found a way to keep him in. Even if he says he's a monolith expert, I feel like that's a little narrow of a major. He's going to have trouble on the job market if the series destroying them all, but I'm so glad he's sticking around.
Yeah, and it is a good thing to hinge his character on then. If that's a thing in the lore that they want to move forward with, they're like, what can we attach Istrid to? And then definitely a thing. I like it too. Also, I love the muttering bit too, that he just yeets a thing to the bus and just like, he realizes midair, like, oh shit, I should have done that. And he just rushes to it to like save it from clattering on the floor, breaking. I love that. It was very funny.
I will agree, like, with his character, I really like that they are continuing to use him. And it does make sense, given that he's a historian, he's an archaeologist.
Yeah.
So to have him go through the plot line and storyline that he has this season, I feel like makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I'm, thrilled to be seeing him back. And we'll kind of get to dive in this episode specifically and really lean on Istrid, as we'll see Geralt do as well. After portaling into the library, Geralt reveals that Triss sent him to Istrid for information. And while Istrid initially, brushes him aside, Geralt convinces him by unbagging the myriapod head and chucking it on the floor, which startles him, to say the least.
It's probably something that was said in the previous episodes as well, because this happens twice. But Geralt needing to sit down after the portal because he's probably a bit nauseous or something. It's great. I love that little touch. It's like little touches here and there of that kind of comedy. It's just, I love it.
Obviously, we've seen this from Geralt's side, what he's doing, where he's going, who he's going to talk to. But Istrid's just doing his homework. And then all of a sudden, this large, dirty man has walked into your library and thrown a monster head on the floor. I would not be into that.
Which he leaves there. We discover he leaves it there for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, Geralt, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, just clean it up.
You're not going to need that later?
Oh, man.
I really like that they're pairing Istrid and Geralt here. Like, if they're going to still adapt to Shard of Ice, then I really like that they've met each other before. And it's a natural pairing in terms of characters, but narratively speaking, it makes a whole heap of sense, I think. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme of this episode. We have Triss and Vesemir butting heads, Yen and Jaskier trying to escape, and then there's Geralt and Istrid. This whole episode is these odd pairings put together. And there's not a ton of action in this episode. It's kind of all, moving the plot forward, discussing things, and that's never a bad thing. I love episodes like that in any show. So I'm glad that they're taking this opportunity to put these characters that you'll not necessarily expect to work together or have to work together, just putting them together and seeing the magic that happens, especially in the case of Yen and Jaskier.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to mentally pause when you were just like, I love shit like this.
I do love shit like this.
In the next scene, Yennefer searches for Jaskier at the docks, having left the boat bound for Cintra. Back in the tavern, Jaskier is tortured by Rince, and in the morning, Yennefer approaches a sex worker to see if she can find information about Jaskier. At the cutoff of episode 4, Yen had her little eyeballs peeking out of the ship, and that's just how we ended the episode.
I love that shot so much.
It was definitely like a cliffhanger, but just the shot itself was a little bit funny. As she actually leaves the boat, she has to make that decision whether to board again or whether to actually, run off and really look for Jaskier. And as she's making this decision, we're watching the guards from the dock stringing up Balion, the elf from the previous episode, by his feet, and he's clearly dead, which is a really sad outcome for that storyline from episode 4.
Just the whole thing with the elves is just, it's so sad this season, especially because in Cintra they're trying to keep the hope up, but considering what else will happen with Francesca and her baby, it's kind of like, oh man, this is going to be sad.
Yeah.
And you already know it.
Yeah. I know, Alyssa, you've mentioned this in previous episodes, but I really like that they're doing stuff with the elves and Nilfgaard, making that connection actually something that we get to see instead of just hearing about secondhand. The POV here is usually going to be from Fringilla, which you don't necessarily trust everything she's doing because you know who she's working for, what she's coming from. But in the books, with so much of the information we get about this coming from the Scoia'tael, who are also very, very unreliable narrators just based on their position in the world and what they're fighting for, it is nice to actually see some version of what is going on behind the scenes so we can understand it ourselves.
At this point, we leave Yennefer. We're back in the tavern with Jaskier and Rince, where Rince has bound Jaskier to a chair and is starting to interrogate him about Geralt. This is pretty similar in terms of content to what we see in Blood of Elves. Yeah, so we start to see the beginning of that interrogation, and we see how panicked Jaskier really is.
We already see how great both of these actors really are.
Yeah.
Because this is already, like, I always feel like torture scenes must be one of the hardest things to really act. How do you act like you're so much in pain? Like, you're probably hopefully never have been that much in pain in your life. How are you going to act that? Like,
right.
I'm always very impressed when people do that, doing it, but also when they pull it off very well. It must be very emotionally draining. So I always have like huge respect for both actors involved.
It must be insane, like trying to come down from that as well and trying to release that character.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard of actors who, when they do very emotionally intense scenes or have emotionally intense characters or storylines that they have to, like, it'll take them weeks or months to sometimes come down from like what their character was feeling and what they experienced in character, which isn't a light subject at all.
There has to be so much trust between the actors to be able to do that. Like, going back to Game of Thrones, the actors who played Ramsay and Theon during seasons 3 and 4, it's all torture. It's all torture of Theon. You know, the way they got through it is just becoming friends outside of it. They would just go to pubs together after filming, just hang out, and they're like best of friends for life now. They had to build that trust to pull through these scenes. And another thing about this scene is you kind of see how loyal of a friend Jaskier is to Geralt, even though he's so angry at him. He's written this biting song about him, about all the bad shit he's done to him. He left him. He hasn't seen him in months, but he can't give Geralt up. He's not going to do it. This is one of the first times that you really see the effect that Geralt has on these people. He's not going to give them away.
Yeah.
I wonder if, like, the way that they have intimacy coordinators for, you know, romantic scenes or sexual scenes in film, I wonder if they have intimacy coordinators or, like, something adjacent for scenes like this. Because, like, going back to your note about trust, like, I wonder if that's something that actually probably should be monitored on set for sure.
Yeah, I believe they usually had, for Game of Thrones, I think they had a couple therapists on hand just in case.
Yeah.
For throughout the show. It was such an intense show. Anybody might need a therapist. And I believe I read somewhere that The Witcher has one as well. Don't quote me on that. Cut this out if I'm wrong. I don't want to look like a fool, but
I probably won't cut it out.
okay, that's all right. That's fine. I'll take it.
A thought that I had about like acting in general as a job. What you were saying about that people will sometimes need weeks or months to like let go of a character and really come back to yourself. It's like I could totally imagine that can cause like small identity crises. Like acting, you're usually people who are very talented, but you probably also like need to have the talent to be able to deal with that, especially if you're playing very emotionally taxing characters. So, like, again, like, this is just praise and just respect for people who are actors. Like, damn, so cool.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we move forward throughout the episode and the season, we'll get to see that as the season kind of hits its emotional and action high. But before we move on, Yennefer and a sex worker.
Oh, boy.
So Yennefer goes up to a sex worker and tries to find out if she can get information about Jaskier. She asks the woman if she's available, basically, and the woman's like, you're pretty. Like, what do you want? A Twisted Mermaid is going to cost you extra. My knees aren't what they used to be. It's like,
The Twisted Mermaid.
What's a Twisted Mermaid?
I don't want to know what the twisted part of it is. I can't even imagine.
You need your knees.
Apparently you do.
That's the only thing we know.
Yeah, apparently.
We see Yennefer give her some sort of currency, and then the woman takes a little bite out of it and is like, all right, you know, I'll go see if there's a Jaskier or any information about a Jaskier down at the barracks, and then kind of wanders off. And this feels like the worst part of a D&D game of like, holy crap, what NPC did I just get?
The party is split.
Oh.
One of them is making bad decisions.
Hey, James, what's that like, you think?
I plead the fifth.
Before we continue our discussion, we're going to hand it over to Lars from Witcherflix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, James, Robin, and I will continue our discussion of Turn Your Back.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody. The filming for Season 3 is still in full swing, but it has become harder and harder to learn what exactly is happening on the Witcher set. As a result, this is a very short installment of Tidings from Toussaint. After all in all 2 weeks of filming, the Witcher crew has wrapped its production in Morocco. Thanks to Redanian intelligence, we know that Freya Allen was present during the filming in the deserts around Erfurt. Moreover, photos were posted on social media that confirm that at least 2 white horses have been on the Witcher set. Of course, this whole scene makes you think of series episodes in the Korath Desert. This means that one or both horses will almost definitely stand in for unicorns. We can expect that their horns will be digitally added in post-production. This would also mean that a very special unicorn named Ihuara Crux is confirmed to appear in Season 3. But not only unicorns will make an appearance in the Korath Desert in Season 3. According to Gaia Mondadori's posts on Instagram, she has been in Morocco as well to film some scenes. Gaia played series mother Princess Pavetta in Season 2 and 3. This means that Pavetta could appear in another dream or vision sequence as well, when Ciri wanders the deserts. Moreover, KFTV reports on a new rumor. The Witcher could continue its global tour as the crew could move to Costa Rica and possibly the Maldives in the coming weeks for filming establishing shots, which means that no cast members would be involved. We will see if this rumor is true. Before I finish this tiny episode of Tidings from Toussaint, there are still 2 great pieces of news to report. First, Season 2 of The Witcher has earned itself 3 Emmy nominations. The show was nominated for Outstanding Fantasy Sci-Fi Costumes, Special Visual Effects, and Stunt Coordination. Congratulations to everyone involved. I'm already keeping my fingers crossed for the big Emmy night. Secondly, Netflix has finally shed some light on the release date of the Witcher spin-off miniseries Blood Origin. Unfortunately, they aren't too specific, but Netflix UK posted on Twitter that Blood Origin will be released later in 2022. This isn't a lot, but it is something. Good to hear official news about Blood Origin again. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you all stay safe and well. We'll talk again in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
Hey everyone, welcome to our listener call-in segment, Dear Friend. Keep on listening as members of our international hanza share their thoughts on what we're discussing in this episode.
Hi, this is Michelle in Mexico. A nice change from the books is setting up Istredd and Geralt's rivalry now, so that it adds more drama and more complexity to the relationship later, even with something just as simple as them disagreeing about what to call Yennefer. It establishes they both know the other one has history and they have to work together anyways.
Hey, I'm Christian from South Africa and Canada, and what I really loved about episode 5 was Drunk Yennefer. She did a great job diffusing the tension after Joey Beatty's excellent performance after being tortured. And I thought it was just amazing how she just put rinse on his ass and just blew alcohol into his face. It was perfect.
Thanks to Michelle and Christian for sending in their thoughts in episode 205, Turn Your Back. Hear your voice in a future Dear Friend segment by emailing greetings@breakfastinbeauclair.com or DMing the podcast on social for more information. Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, Geralt had sought out Istredd for his expertise on the continent's monoliths as Yennefer searches for Jaskier, who is being tortured by the recently escaped fire mage, Rince. And we circle back around to Geralt and Istredd, who head to the Stellacite monolith outside of Cintra. This will be a familiar location to everybody who's seen Season 1, Episode 1, The End's Beginning, and continually throughout the series, we've talked about and seen this monolith outside of Cintra, and now we get to revisit it after the Battle of Cintra. This scene is really just Geralt and Istredd kind of walking on the path, like having a bit of a chit-chat, and Istredd trying to suss out Geralt and why he's actually here, and Geralt being like, because monsters, right?
Protecting the world, making sure everyone's safe.
Yeah, obviously. It's like a bit of a silly little conversation.
Every conversation they have is a silly little conversation, if we're being honest here.
Oh my god. They're equally dumb in a different way from Rince, but we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that in the next few scenes.
Yeah, but I love how they're bouncing off of each other, though.
Oh, they have such great chemistry.
Yes, and they're like, just it would perfectly set up like a rivalry for a Shard of Ice if this is like the energy that's happening between them. So I love that.
Their little fight scene with the guards when Geralt knocks one out and Istrid's like, I can do it too.
Yeah. Like upstaging each other.
Yeah.
Anything you could do, I could do better. That's all that feels like.
Exactly.
I do think you're right, Robin. Like, if this is the energy that we're getting and there's like no stakes, like what happens when we start adding like romantic stakes to the equation?
Oh, maybe that's a little foreshadowing. Geralt knows that Istrid is capable, and obviously Geralt is capable too. Now Geralt knows, if I gotta fight this guy to the death for the love of my life, I gotta be careful.
Yeah. I don't know. I have. We'll see what happens. But the one little like tidbit that we do get from Istrid here is that it's revealed that Calanthe didn't allow access to this monolith. The thing is that Nilfgaard ? Does, but we do hear that from Istrid off the top of this scene. But yeah, so we're starting to kind of put in the foundations for this mystery that'll take Istrid through the rest of the season.
What I was thinking, like, if Calanthe was trying to hide this, there's like a lot of out of chronologic puzzle pieces in this episode. Because first, like, when they're talking, Istrid says, like, okay, the sheer force it would require, what could possibly do that? And that immediately, like, gives us the clue again of, like, okay, yeah, Ciri's powers are strange and slightly otherworldly and perhaps, like, something that is a bit impossible. It's also revealed that Calanthe did not allow access to the monolith. So maybe Calanthe was trying to hide her family's connection to these monoliths and to the conjunction, which is what is implied throughout the second half of this episode. So, like, there's a lot of offhand comments and things that are said in this scene that are actually, like, little clues already for what I think they're trying to do with this episode. So that's what I really like. Like, there's little lines and puzzle pieces everywhere.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I didn't pick up on that at all, that Calanthe wasn't just trying to, I don't know, keep people away from it, that she actually had this reason because she doesn't like her bloodline. I never thought of that. That's a great point.
Yeah, and it's something that we talk about more in episode 206 as well, as Istrid actually kind of uncovers all of this at Codringern Fens.
You know, Geralt, he says to, like, okay, are you okay with, like, joining Nilfgaard and working for them to help the elves while you know they're actually mass murderers? And, like, Istrid shoots back at him, like, as opposed to only helping people when there's coin in it. And, like, there's a little bit of duality of morals going on here, which is also part of, like, their little rivalry that they might be setting up here. But it's mostly the thought that I had about this is, like, oh yeah, they're trying to show us again, like, this is a gray world. This is a world that is not black and white. Like, there's not good and evil. Istrid is someone who is trying to do something good, which is, like, help the elves, and Geralt's like, yeah, but, you know, you're also sort of helping Nilfgaard, who are, like, mass murderers. And if you read the books, but also if you've seen the first season, you already know about this world. Like, it's gray. It's always gray. It's never black and white. It's never good versus evil. There's always big area in between, and that's, I feel like they're being consistent with that if they put in, like, little bits of that everywhere too. So I like that a lot.
I think that's one of the spots in this episode that the title connects. Just turn your back. It doesn't have a very specific point in this episode where it's like, oh, that's what that means. But I think this is one of those where you can pick up on it, is Istrid turning his back on the bad parts of Nilfgaard to do what he thinks is right, and then he puts that back on Geralt. If there's money in it, you'll turn your back on any of your morals. And I think that carries through into the next few scenes as well, in different places with different characters.
And in the next scene, Ciri continues training as Triss and Vesemir quietly argue about using her blood to create more Witchers. So Ciri's back up on the pendulum. We see her. She's really, really going at it, and she's training independently, which is awesome. And Triss comes up to her and is kind of telling her to, like, come inside. And she's like, no, I'm going to train. I'm going to get it right. I'm going to be the best fighter I can possibly be. And as Triss is walking away, Vesemir comes up and he tries to convince her again of their use of Ciri's blood to create more Witcher mutagen. Triss says to Vesemir, you know what, I still think this is a terrible idea, but if we do it, it has to be her decision to participate.
Yeah, I mean, we already had, like, a big discussion about it, even in text form, which was really great, actually. If Ciri is already on the pendulum being like, oh, I want to be big strong, that vibe. Like I just need to be the best I can be. And that's like the whole vibe that Ciri's been having in this like episode. She's like, I just gotta be good. There's like this perfectionist streak here, which like kind of explains what she's going through in this episode. Yeah, how do you start this discussion?
I did put an extra note in at the end. You did convince me of. I'm mostly on your side now. So I have a few problems with the whole making more Witchers plotline. Starting with Vesemir as a character. First of all, most of this doesn't happen. So Vesemir's character is much smaller. His role is not as expansive.
He's in the books for exactly 2 chapters in Blood of Elves, and that's it. We never see him again.
Yeah.
So most of what we love about Vesemir is from The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
This character feels inconsistent with that, which is fine. He's not supposed to be the exact same character in the video game because technically this show does not have much to do with the games. But after the whole situation with Eskel, he has become desperate. It is a decent continuation of his character from Nightmare of the Wolf. He's tired of watching his boys die over all these years, trying to raise them and do the Trial of the Grasses and turn them into Witchers to keep the family going. It's all about family with the Witchers. I've always had trouble grasping the fact that the previous attempts at the Trials of the Grasses have been so scarring for him that he would get this desperate this quickly to try it again. Obviously, having the opportunity with Ciri, with her elder blood, which is growing flowers, that can get a man excited. I don't like the way I said that. I'm sorry. But then I also feel like some of this situation has to be put on Triss's shoulders. She is the leading magical expert at Kaer Morhen right now. Probably the smartest person in that entire building. She's essentially in charge of Ciri right now. Geralt is gone. He has kind of left the burden of taking care of her, mostly on everybody there, but specifically on Triss and Vesemir, and Lambert to an extent. To hand it off to Robin in a second, I initially thought that Triss putting the decision on Ciri is reckless and dangerous because, as you can clearly see in the background of this very shot, she is training her ass off on the pendulum to, like Robin said, become bigger and stronger, get those big muscles, beat everybody up who wants to kill her. So of course she's going to say yes, but Robin, now explain why I am not fully correct.
I think Triss is trying to give agency back to Ciri, and that's like both Triss as a character, as like a person within this universe, but also the writers through Triss trying to give Ciri agency. And I think that's something that returns later on in this episode, but that it's mostly about Triss giving Ciri the agency to be like, what does she want? Because there's a lot of stuff that's been going on in Ciri's life that's happened without her consent.
Her entire life.
Yeah.
Everything happens to her.
Exactly. And it's mostly just that Triss is now being like, yeah, okay, but a lot of stuff is decided about her. Now she gets to decide herself what she wants. And there's no talk yet about like what happens later with the Trial of the Grasses thingy, but it's just about giving her blood, and I feel like that makes sense.
Right. But I feel like there's still a level of like guardianship. Geralt left his child surprise in Triss's care.
Yeah.
By entertaining this idea at all with Vesemir, she's still complicit, like in the fact that it's even on the table.
Yeah.
By giving him the freedom to be like, okay, I can go like ask Ciri to do this now. It almost feels like she's like, well, if I give her agency, then it's not my problem because I told her she could do what she wants.
Yeah, not my fault.
Exactly. It means she kind of like pushes the blame, any blame, off of herself specifically because it was Ciri's choice and Vesemir's gonna go get her to do it. So I'm kind of like mixed on it in that like I do think it makes sense for Triss's character to want to respect Ciri's decision and Ciri's choice.
Right.
At the same time, it feels like a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah. I think that is something that you can trace back to the way that this show is written. So that's an out-of-universe explanation for why I think this happens this way, because I think it's all about giving Ciri agency as a character.
Yeah.
Which we'll touch upon later, I think.
I do also think that it's consistent with Triss's character. Like, she's one of the youngest sorcerers, relatively. She's naive, at least to start the books. Passing this off to her quote-unquote sister is something that Triss would do. Like, if this was Yennefer, it would be a different story. She would put her foot down, say, hell no, this is dangerous, you're not doing it. But Triss is very much kind of a person who would rather people make their own choices. And anything that Triss is doing right now is better than what she was doing at this point in the books, if we're being honest.
I mean, I guess, yeah.
At least she's doing something and not laying in the back of a cart.
Right. Right. Well, I guess at this point, she was still training Ciri in magic and teaching her self-esteem.
Yes.
So maybe that's
is
teaching agency and self-esteem is maybe, as you said, in the spirit of this character.
I think a lot of this also has to do with the fact that they sort of aged Ciri up a bit. So that also makes like a difference. Like she's also like at some point later in this episode, she says, "I'm not a child," and that's like very true in the show. Because in the books, it would have been like a 12-year-old saying, "I'm not a child," and you would be like, "Oh yeah, you are." But with a 15-year-old, that's different. So
we've had this conversation continually throughout every single episode of the podcast. Like, no one really knows how old Ciri's meant to be because she was meant to be 12 in season 1, but now it's only been like 2 months.
She's nebulously a teenager.
Yeah, she's somewhere there. It's unclear. And you'll hear this conversation again in the next episode as well. In the next scene, as Yennefer fruitlessly attempts to help an elven mother and daughter, the deathless mother reaches out to tempt her. She's interrupted by the sex worker who recommends Yen try the first place she found Jaskier, the tavern. She finds Rince and Jaskier there and disfigures Rince in their escape. We start to see that, well, again, we go back to the discrimination and the violence that is being imparted against elves, and we see an elven woman being separated from her child and taken away. Yennefer from the shadows attempts to help them with magic and is attempting to cast a spell, but as we know, it's not going to work. But then she gets that voice in the back of her head from the Deathless Mother. The Deathless Mother tells her, "Your power, you need it. All you have to do is ask." And Yennefer shouts out loud, like, "No." So she's still very much resisting this, but it is, as you said, James, heartbreaking that she's unable to help them.
I feel like she has a feeling that's a continuation of like last season. Like she feels like she needs her powers to be worthy as a human being or worthy of existing. Like that's kind of the characterization they've given Yennefer. And even if she tries to like do something good in this world, she can't even do that because she doesn't have her powers. And there's like this sense of helplessness and powerlessness that she has not had for a long time. And that feeling of powerlessness is lost in her story at the exact moment that she becomes a fully realized sorceress. So right now she's like right back at that traumatic moment in her life that she thought she left behind. And she's very much struggling, like trying to find out, who am I? How am I going to navigate this world now that I do not have my powers? And because she has hung up her self-worth so much on her magical powers, that's like exactly why she'll, at the end of the episode, succumb to the Deathless Mother and actually do it and get her powers back.
Yeah, I think this connects back to one of my favorite scenes from season 1, Yennefer on the beach with the corpse of the baby. As a character, she has this soft spot for children, mothers. Deep down, that's what she wants.
Yeah.
Every time she has some experience with a child or a mother or a dead baby, it's so sad. She wants so desperately to help. And as she says in her speech to that child, the world sucks. It's never going to be fair for women, for children, for anybody. And she wants so desperately to help. And now she has all this power too, and it's locked away. It's really tough to watch that.
And then at this point, Yennefer is then approached by that sex worker who tells her, like, didn't find anything, but, you know, I would recommend looking at the first place you tried, because whenever I do that, I always find my men at the bottom of a bottle in the morning. Yennefer takes that to heart and goes back to the tavern where, surprise, surprise, she finds Jaskier and Rince, who has been at this all night. It's now the morning. And Jaskier has blood just like dribbling down his face and onto his clothing. At the beginning of this morning scene, Rince finally takes off his coat and starts to really torture Jaskier with his fire. We get that reiteration of like fire magic is forbidden, but you know, most people can't use it, but you have to be very talented. Oh yeah, and you also have to get rid of your soul. But no big deal, I can do it. And then, yeah, again, the acting between Joey Beatty and Chris Fulton is just
So good.
incredible in
Yeah.
this scene. And yeah, and then we get this delightful entrance from Yennefer, who comes in pretending to be drunk, pretending to be Jaskier's wife.
So good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything, like hiccups and all.
Yeah.
She's like, you left me at home, you scoundrel, meh. And Jaskier panics because he obviously has been at this all night and he does not want to see Yennefer be harmed. So he warns her against it, and Yennefer presses Rince, who eventually like kind of grabs her and turns her away toward a post. And she takes a swig of her alcohol, and when he lights up his fingers, she shoots the alcohol back in his face and then
Genius.
immediately burns him.
So great.
Yeah, Yen's discovery of Jaskier is a lot here, but what did you guys think of this entire sequence?
It's one of my favorite scenes in the episode. First of all, this is where we get our first hint of Rince's incompetence, taking Jaskier back to the place where he found him and just torturing him there in the tavern. My guy, that is not smart.
No, food service shifts start at like 8 a.m. Like, I don't know why you do that.
Yeah. Like, isn't this tavern supposed to be full? Like, why are there no people? Where's the owner of this establishment?
I guess they don't serve breakfast.
No, even places that open for dinner are still doing prep in the morning.
Yes.
If I've learned anything from YouTube, it's that.
I don't know if this is an intentional choice by Joey Beatty or if it's just something that I'm insane and I'm just hearing things. But there's a point during the torture where his accent kind of slips into, if you listen to any interview with Joey Beatty or even his music, his accent is slightly different from the one he puts on for Jaskier. I don't know if he's doing that as some sort of like Jaskier's putting on this accent to seem more refined, more professional as a bard. If he's just, when he's under this intense pressure, the accent drops and he goes back to, I don't know, basic Jaskier or something. So I reached out to my UK correspondent, Harold, on the Hanza Discord.
I love that we're subcontracting
Yes.
throughout the episode.
I needed the help because I couldn't have figured this out myself. So Joey Beatty speaks with the Geordie dialect, but his accent itself has most likely been muted from living and training at Oxford and in Paris. And it seems like he's even toned it down a little further to the standard Jaskier accent. So if he did intentionally slip back into his regular Joey Beatty accent during this scene, I love that choice. Maybe Jaskier has built himself up a little bit to seem more refined, and now it's just getting all torn down as he's basically at his lowest points that we've seen him so far.
Interesting. Thanks, Harry, for that information as well.
Yes, thank you, Harold. I appreciate all your work.
Robin, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I've read the books once all the way through now, so I forgot how it featured in the books exactly, but like the fire magic thing seems like something that was kind of a no-go zone in the lore. Like, you can't do it, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they explain it very well why it is something that at least exists in the show, or like is something that exists in this world. With the idea of like, oh yeah, you shouldn't do it because it usually consumes the drawer unless you're very talented and it consumes the soul. It explains why fire magic is probably not such a good idea unless you're very talented, like our incompetent man Rince. And it also like explains why Yennefer may have lost her powers when she did the fire surge at the end of season 1. Like, that's very consistent. That makes a whole heap of sense.
Yeah.
So I like that explanation.
Yeah, and you know, that's a nice way to come back around to the fact of his disfigurement. We know this happens in chapter 1 of Blood of Elves, like right out the gate in the books. After Rince tortures Dandelion, he hops through a portal, and Yennefer gets there fast enough to throw something, some sort of very violent spell at him, that when we re-meet him later, his face is now burned and scarred. I was curious how they were going to do that in this season. When we first saw Rince's character, he didn't have any scarring at all. And obviously Yen didn't have her magic, so when the heck would this happen and how? So I do like what they did here, though, and that they were still able to incorporate it and keep that a part of their relationship and storyline.
Yeah.
And cause and build the vendetta that Rince has against Yennefer still. So I did like that, and I thought it was a very clever use of Yennefer's cunning, really, in this episode.
Yeah, and this is what I was talking about at the start of the episode, where the meaning of burn, butcher, burn kind of takes on another life here. As you know, you see the shot of Rince at the start, and it's watch me burn all the memories of you. And then now he's getting burned. So it was a nice tiny little bit of foreshadowing that if you hadn't read the books, you wouldn't have gotten. Yennefer burns him. Also, this is a bit of a tangent, but Rince very much comes from the Doctor Strange school of magic, in which in the comics Doctor Strange is always like, there's a price for magic. Every spell you do costs something. You have to pay the cost. But my guy has like at least 5 times put the world in jeopardy by saying, I'm not going to pay the cost. I have to do what I got to do to save the world. And Rince is very much the same. He's going to do this forbidden magic. Who needs a soul? I'm good. I got my fire magic.
It's 100p going to be the downfall of Rince, and I'm so excited to see it.
Gotta learn your lesson early, man.
I can't wait.
Oh man, same.
In the next scene, Istredd and Geralt arrive at the site of the monolith and are stunned to find a deep gorge. Yeah, I mean, this scene is what it sounds like. They just like kind of climb to the side of the gorge and they're just like, oh, damn.
Big hole.
And Istredd goes on this whole thing of being like, it's unprecedented. There's no historical records of anything like this. You've never seen anything like this. And Geralt's like, it's a canyon, dude. Like, it's like, I know it's weird, but like, we should go down there and check it out. Like,
Geralt's like, get the rope, buddy. We gotta go down.
Although I do really respect how they make these two characters analyze the situation.
Yeah.
Because it's like
you see both of their skill sets.
It's very befitting of their characters and their occupations. It's like I would have the same. I would be Istredd like, what? This is not possible. What is the historical record?
And I would be the one getting the rope out of my backpack.
Yeah.
Are Robin and I actually Geralt and Istredd? Whoa.
Would you yeet a Mariapod head at my feet? Get in, bitch, we're going monoliths searching. I don't know.
If the situation called for it, I absolutely wouldn't clean it up. I can tell you that right now.
Oh my god. No. Let's see.
We've lost it. Okay, back on track.
I'm fine.
Before we get to the rest of the discussion, we're going to take a break here. Next episode, join me, James from the US, and Robin from the Netherlands as we conclude our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher 205, Turn Your Back. Thanks for joining us at The Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint news segment by Alyssa from Flicks. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Mojo Filter Media. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covier, the owner of the Trollish Porpoise, Katie, the redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Ava of Gullipy, Haven at the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Beckenberg Glamorai, Red Kite, the original Roach, Cotamir's Cat, Libby, Jenny Mandilovich, Wolf, Corey from the US, John of Verblia, Tom from Australia, Jill, Kate the Tappy Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Father of Bean, Silas Hype Sorcerer, a Toussaint Knight, Jeanette of Brooklyn, Miriam Chmerian Softy. Special thanks to James and Robin for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support.